Edison, I'd love to know the first time you ever saw, how about an autopsy?
Yeah,
Give us something like that. We're gonna dive right into
yeah,
the deep prep room talk
great,
to start the episode. Come
great,
on,
great. And
Madison.
I dove right into that one. So I was working for the big firm in the world, and I hadn't even gotten enrolled in mortuary school yet. I just thought I knew what I was, talking about when I was with families, and all of this is also taking place in the Wild West of Colorado.
Hmm.
And so I was an ranger at the time, and I was on call that night, and I got the call that a sheriff's deputy had been in a firefight and had unfortunately passed, and the family was to come in the next morning. And at the firm I was at, the big dog on campus that was to see that family member or would have taken really detailed cases like this was off. And
Mm.
that threw 2-month-old funeral arranger me into the ring. So I met with the family, and I promised them I'm going to go see this individual after our arrangement and really just tell can you really be with your loved one as soon as we really are trying to plan this funeral? So just cocky as ever,
Yeah.
24-year-old me walks in, walks in. I have the code to the prep room and everything, and I walk in, and my like the greatest embalmer I've ever met. His name is I don't know if I can say names, but he just the greatest man. He was just going away at stitching and everything, and
Hmm.
this individual had his chest plate just like leaned up against his right calf, and as if it was just a normal day. And I swear to you, I had never even been to the medical examiner's office. Like
Oh no.
I hadn't even, and I want to say that was like one of the very first times I'd ever actually stepped foot into the prep room.
Hmm.
And he kind of turns and he's like, Madison, come here. And he hands me sutures, and he's like, get started. And I was like, okay, and
What
I was like,
now?
dang, it's really hard to sew this up. But it was just like, and he had been shot several times, and
Yeah.
it was the most intense thing. And then to turn around, and I'm seeing several families at the time, and to turn around and see a suicide to the right temple just come in at the same time. And I remember
Jeez.
driving. I remember driving back to the funeral home that day, just crying, like, "What did I get myself into? I can't do this." And it's like, yeah, actually, you can. That's just a really gnarly case, and that, oh man, great,
Good for you
great
for
experience.
sticking through
Yeah,
that and not
yeah.
running because that is a tough thing to see right away.
There's a lot to say about. I don't know how I'm gonna get through this suturing, or I don't know how I'm gonna get through this arrangement with this family, but I just
Hmm.
know I can, because who else is gonna do it? But
Mm, good
also,
point.
really not having somebody on the outside looking in that you can say, hey, can I talk to you about this really epic thing I just saw? And also, I'd really like to go get Mexican food for dinner while we're talking about this. And so that's really kind of interesting, and I'm glad there's an avenue to talk about it.
Yeah, that's what this
Yeah.
show is, and we should have shared some salsa verde while we were talking
Yeah,
about
for sure.
that.
For sure.
But yeah,
Some
that's
margarita.
it's there's a huge thing with persistence as a funeral director. You
Yeah.
have to just be able to just keep going because some
Yeah.
days are really hard, some days are easy, some days are
Yes.
like you can't even take it, some days it pulls on your heart, some days it's crazy on your mind and things are weighing and you're juggling a million things. You just have to be
Yeah.
persistent and keep your nose down and keep your nose to the grindstone and keep pushing
Yeah,
through. And
exactly.
that's what makes us partially why we're such special breed is because we all share that in
Yeah.
common. Where a funeral director, they're going to be one of those dogs in the fight a lot of the times.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So tell us a little bit, I guess, about your background, where you got started, why did you get started, and yeah, your whole
Yeah.
journey as a funeral director.
Yeah. I want to come up with the most elaborate, just falsified story that makes me sound like the coolest person in the world.
Do
But
it. Let's
really,
hear
I
it.
can't, I really can't tell myself where it kind of happened. I know that when I was in fifth grade, I was, I guess, dating boyfriend and girlfriend,
Hmm.
whatever, with this guy who had unfortunately lost his mother in fifth grade, sixth grade even.
Jeez.
And I remember, and it was just it was the most beautiful service that I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember going to the funeral and it being the first display of any kind of ceremony at all. The first funeral I'd ever gone to
Yeah.
in this massive church. And it kind of always stayed in the back of my head. But, you know, when they ask you at 12 years old, you think astronaut is what you want to be. And then you lose somebody else, you know, several years later. I lost my grandfather and my uncle
Oh.
in 2014, 2011 and 2014. And going to the funeral home and following the guy in the suit and just having the curiosity of what's behind all the closed doors. And
Right.
that was kind of really what was really interesting. But I had always seen representation in my family that I guess the word could be ministry, but it's certainly something
It
deeper than
is.
that.
It is.
That the way that I'm called into the universe to help people looks different than how it was represented to me as a child. My mom has two master's degrees in
Mm-hmm.
nursing, and my twin sister is a nurse. My eldest
Mm-hmm.
sister is a paramedic. My dad's a
Mm-hmm.
coal miner. So there's never been any kind of here's a funeral director in the family, and
Yeah.
here's what start to finish looks like. And so I went to nursing school. I did the nursing assistant, and it was during COVID that I went to nursing school, and it was like, dude, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to do this. I remember looking at my lab partner and doing very well in nursing school, but I was like, I'm dropping out today. I'm not doing this anymore. So
Yeah.
all of this at the same time, since 2017, I had enlisted in the United States Army and I served as a corrections officer. And
Thank you
you
for
know,
your
before the
service. Thank you.
pandemic, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And before the pandemic, all I knew was your green army suit and,
Yeah.
you know, take orders, and you just kind of get through the day, you get through the week, and you'll have passions later. And so
Yeah.
the reason that I joined the army was money and
Mm-hmm.
education and school, but
Sure.
here I am doing the exact opposite of what I really, really want to do in my life. So
Yeah.
I I was really lucky. I called the local funeral home and I said, I'll just clean your bathrooms, dude.
Yep.
Can I have a job? Because I just lost everything, everything. You know, I dropped out of school. I really didn't have any plans or prospects or anything. And they had me in for an interview. And 3 interviews later, I thought I had gotten the job as a receptionist, but Colorado Springs, Colorado, they offered me the full-time funeral arranging position. And
Nice.
I worked with a great team of women and two men, and our whole team at that firm was all women, and the oldest of us all was like 38. And so
Wow.
coming to Texas, you know, you have they're very patriotic here, so that's a really great
Yeah.
attribute to have on your resume. But
Yeah.
you know, you step into, unfortunately, the male dominated field in this part of the world, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting my hat in the ring and I'm just as good. You know, I
Of
can do
course.
this. But you know, my experience is that I built nothing. I came from nothing, and I have no one representing what it looks like to be a successful funeral director or embalmer. It just
Right.
that's me, and we're doing great so far.
That's amazing. You made your own path is what you did.
Yeah,
And that's a hard thing because
yeah,
it's uncharted territory that you don't know what's going to
yeah,
happen. The uncertainty is got to be super challenging.
yeah,
And going from the army into funeral service, it's got to be just an interesting transition for a whole lot of reasons. So
yeah,
I'd love to hear about that, how that transition was,
yeah.
and were there any similarities or what were the big differences? Obviously, they're very different, but I'm sure that there's
Sorry.
something in between there that there was some correlation.
Yeah, there is so many. Even just yesterday, I could remember telling myself, "This is just like the army." So when I and the suits are kind of the same. They're just kind of different. You know, we've all got a penguin suit in one manner or a pickle suit, whatever. But
Oh,
when I when I enlisted, or when I was getting ready to enlist, the recruiter, who was just this badass. Oh my gosh, she was just, if you, I don't even know. So she was what's, I want to say, I'm going to mess it up, but a 92 mic, I think is what the coding was. So
okay.
as a corrections officer, you're now a 31 series, 31 Echo. It's all jargon to say I work for the Military Police Corps, and she works for a different corps that happens to have mortuary affairs within it.
Oh, okay.
Um, and her desk had the Grim Reaper all over it, and I was like, I want to talk to her. And my husband instead had me sit at the recruiter's desk, who was his recruiter, who like is our our soul tie, and the reason I think that we ended up staying together, and we got married, and he
Yeah.
claims ownership of our everything and whatever. He's just a great guy. But I said, I really want to do that. And they were saying, well, that doesn't have any openings right now. There's kind of a season for every job, and some jobs are constantly hiring and some just
Yeah.
aren't. And so I took the job with the most money, the highest bonus, whatever you want to call it. And so I went through. Nothing really in basic was relatively on the same plane as what I do now.
Yeah.
But what I will say is in 2018, I was in Guantanamo, Cuba,
Mm-hmm.
and not someone that was even close to me. I didn't know of this person, but they had unfortunately passed, and I wasn't able to go to the funeral, and we had to work all day to cover this unit's shift so that they could honor their lost or their
Sure.
fallen soldier.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I that is so interesting that I have nothing to do with that, but it's still impacting us in such a way that
Yeah.
we're honoring this person. We didn't even know it, and it was just this like unity of we don't know this kid, nothing like that. So when I was working in Colorado, in I'll butcher it, but sometime in the summer of 22,
Mm-hmm.
this individual, another individual, he was 3 days from coming home from this 9-month deployment, and he
No.
was found unconscious,
Oh,
and there was something about missing a
heartbreaking.
flight or trading a flight. The story really gets lost in translation, but
Yeah.
when they brought him, he got to our funeral home like 30 minutes before his service, and he'd been all everywhere except in our funeral home all over
Talk about a
the
quick
world. And
turnaround.
yeah, oh yeah. No, it was like 3 weeks, I want to say. But he comes in and he's in his dress blues, and he's the
Yeah.
same rank that my husband is at the time, and
Weird.
he looks like my husband. And it's like
Weird.
you just see people in that, and you're like, oh my gosh. So now, not
Yeah.
to say anything, but my husband's deployed, and it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
just need this to not be my life. But
Yeah.
and the positive of it all, the funeral industry, funeral profession, whatever, is all about hurry up and wait, and so is the Army. Why are we getting to the church 2 hours early when you know that they're going to have a meal, and
So true.
there's no body even here either?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's great. The camaraderie is really the morbid sense of humor. The camaraderie, just being checked on, is
Huge.
at least where I'm at right now is just so unique.
Yeah, you have to have that sense of humor. That's part of it. The
Yes.
camaraderie with the people at your funeral home. That
Yes.
always makes for the best jobs in this industry is when you have that connection with the people that you're
Yeah.
working with. I'm so lucky to work with my family, so it's built in
Yes.
naturally.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I did like
Yes.
the correlation to hurry up and wait because as funeral directors, that's a
Yes.
lot of what we have to do.
Yes.
Unless you like to fly,
Exactly.
a little close to close quarters, a little tight. But that
Yeah.
usually just leads to too much stress. But that's super
Yeah.
cool. Tell us, I'm just interested. So, what did you do in the army? What was your role? And then, yeah, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah. So in the Army, I was again a 31 Echo, which is a detention and resettlement, or it's just a corrections officer. And the Army
Hmm.
has this fancy way of advertising it to bright-eyed, bushy-tailed little 19-year-olds. But I, uh, I was in college, and I again dropped out because I was like, I always said I'm really going to regret if I don't join the Army.
Mm.
Again, no woman in my family had ever been a service member, so it was kind of like I'm just like blazing trails left and right.
Yeah,
But
what was that calling? Like, where was it? It seemed like you've had multiple callings in your life. Like you said, you had some
yeah,
like signs, like some within. So I'd love to know what that is
yeah,
about you that has that.
you know, the only thing I can attribute it to was at the time my parents had gotten a divorce. It was an okay kind of event that I thought I was taking it pretty well.
Yeah.
But I had always well, I'd always kind of been a little bit overweight. And this divorce caused me to just like not eat or anything. And I was really kind of sad. And I kind of actually got to a weight where I was like, oh, I could probably be good enough to like not be too big to join the army. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was really the catalyst that said, okay, you're good enough to get in. But then
Wow.
my grandfather, yeah, it's kind of,
That's tough.
stories aside,
Yeah.
that is a really unfortunate thing that
Mm-hmm.
women have to go through, and men, whatever. But the the history of joining the service was that my grandfather was in the 33rd Army Band in Heidelberg, Germany in 1954 or
Wow.
56. And he'd always kind of talked about the military. He always said I should join the band. I played the clarinet from the time I was in sixth grade until I was, I guess, a sophomore in college, and I really enjoyed it. I love music, still love music, and so I always was gonna eventually try out for the army band,
Yeah.
but the money was too good to be. Um, you'll hear it called a cage kicker. Totally the most awful name for a corrections officer in the United States Army, but
Sure.
um, so the calling really was just that I don't want to be, 35, 40 and have regretted not going
Yep.
whenever, I was
Yep.
19, 20.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that your 20s are the times that you get to make mistakes and have terrible credit scores or whatever.
An
So I was like,
experiment. Yeah.
let's just join it. And my husband, my boyfriend at the time, was really encouraging of me enlisting. So yeah,
Super cool. That's awesome.
yeah,
It does
yeah,
remind me of one of the first episodes that I did on here. It was maybe with like episode like 4 or 5, something like that. We had a gentleman that was part of the mortuary affairs, and it was
mm,
one of the coolest talks, besides this one, of
yeah.
course.
No, that's
That
okay.
no, no, no. I'm being genuine as well. But it was just such an interesting world that he came from, and something that
Yeah,
most people are never going to see in their lives, even if you are a funeral director. It was just wild. So
yeah.
if anyone that's listening is interested in that kind of stuff at all, you got to scroll all the way back and find it. It's a super cool
Yeah.
listen. Yeah.
Well, and something I'd say, and I guess if we kind of have to put the funeral directing in a box for just a second,
Mm-hmm.
something that is really interesting to kind of, well, no, let's take the funeral directing out of the box. We go to services constantly that, we have veterans that served in Vietnam. We have Korean veterans. We have even enduring Operation Enduring Freedom, your most recent campaign. You have people
Yeah.
that we see veterans all the time, and in a smaller town, it is such a really big thing to have the Army come out. It's such a big thing to have the
Yeah.
Navy, have the Marines come out. When the Air Force shows up, that says something. And
Yeah.
then when you have these retirees that get this big thing, it's like you have some quarrels with the little instances that you had in the military. There's certain memories that you do want to put beyond yourself, and you don't want to be reminded of. And there's certain things that you do in the military to just survive.
Sure.
And then you get to this resolution of this person's life, and their family was so proud of them, and this military institution that came out to devote several hours of preparation and do all this, that
Yeah.
it's like when I salute, and I'm trying not to get emotional, but when I salute, I'm
No.
like, it doesn't matter anymore. There's so many things that I did that I really wish that a therapist and I could just get down and get into the weeds about why did I have to go through these things and why did I have to see these things. And as just a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, I couldn't even
Yeah.
drink to get through these things, but I
Right.
did go through these things. And then you see that and you're like, wow, that's so incredible. And
Yeah.
it speaks volumes to, thanking people for their service. But what feels so foreign to veterans and even active service members, and now I speak on the veteran side of things, that
Mm-hmm.
when people say thank you for your service, sometimes we look at them and we say, but I didn't do anything. I don't, why are
It's
you
not
thanking
true.
me? The buddy that you ought to thank is the one that lays in Arlington now. and
Yeah.
and and so it's like kind of carrying that weight of, it's a badge of honor, but it's also like I could have done so much more. But
Hmm.
it all just comes to this finite resolution of people are really thankful for me, and they're really
Yeah.
thankful, and I'm really thankful for the people that show up and that give such honor and dignity to veterans, especially. I'm a huge proponent of thanking Vietnam veterans for their
Hmm.
service, for just this lack of welcome and praise and admiration that they
Yeah.
got. So,
Yeah.
funeral director in me says everyone deserves reverence and everyone deserves dignity, but
Yep.
it's really just the highest exemplification or exemplary
Yeah.
example of that. So, there's my soapbox.
I got the chills multiple times on that
Yeah.
soapbox. So it must have
Thank
been a
you.
little cold on top of that box because
You know,
I'm
I
shivering
think
over here.
Texas is getting a cold front or something.
So
Let's
much
yeah,
good,
you know.
so much good stuff there.
Well, thank you.
We had a service this morning for a gentleman that was a veteran as well, and it's just every time it gives you that
Yes.
feeling, and it's so special, and it's special to the family.
Yes.
Like that is such a big thing, is
Yeah.
like the family, it means so much to them.
Yeah.
And when, as funeral directors, when we're able to connect and make that
Yeah.
happen for them, it just
Exactly.
means the world. And like you were saying about the fallen soldiers, I was in Normandy a few months ago, and that was
Wow.
literally life
Oof.
changing,
Yeah.
like to go there.
Yeah.
And I recommend anyone, that's from the United States or anywhere in the world, really, just to go see it, because it was
Yeah.
amazing. But funeral directors
Oh,
especially, and getting to go to the American national cemeteries in
yeah.
France there, it was so cool, and an experience that I'll never forget. And it's just
Yeah.
things like that there is that connection that we have.
Yeah.
And it's just a
Well, and it
beautiful
breaks you
thing.
out of that. It almost breaks you out of like some little bits of burnout that we tend to find
Yeah.
ourselves in, like, it's just another cremation family and it's just another this, and okay, I gotta, make sure I call the army, and oh, did we get the flag, and you do all these check your boxes, and then you get there and it's again, you're like,
Whoa.
okay, it was all worth it. The
Yep.
family didn't even know that I was nervous to even think that the army wasn't going to show up
Yeah.
today. I
And
just faxed it over last night, and
it's like, come on, it's
you
the
know
army.
uh,
They're going to be
thank
there.
and thank goodness the VFW just has some great men in it, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting, especially, I'm 26 years old, and at 25 on my wedding anniversary, my 5-year wedding anniversary, I pre-planned my funeral, and it was like,
No
well, that's not
kidding.
really, I pre-planned my funeral, and I said, we always joke amongst ourselves, the cheapest funeral was yesterday, or the cheapest pre-need to plan was yesterday. It's
Yeah.
not getting any less expensive.
True.
And I remember sending over the paperwork because I was in Colorado and the person that I wanted to pre-need with is in Texas.
Hmm.
And I remember he texted me and he said, "Do you want to put your DD 214 in the file?" You know, and I'm like, I don't think I deserve that. Like, what did
That's
I do? And it goes back
nonsense.
to, well, and it's very, I think it's just that thought you kind of have that I did end up putting a DD 214 in there. It says, which I had to go back and say, okay, this says that I had this many things, but that's wrong. And when I got a DD 214 when I got out of basic, and then I got a DD 214. I have like 3 of them, which is different than how my husband will get his. But I was like, this says private, but make sure that specialist, and that's such like the funny. I hate to say funniest rank, but the most rank you can have with the least amount of responsibility is your little specialist. Your sham shield is what we call them. They
Okay.
avoid all responsibility. But so it's kind of like, do I think I deserve it? Well, it's not really about that. It's about this resolution and your family getting to say, like, the
Yeah.
transference of the flag to my
Yeah.
husband or to my children. It's
Right.
just this, like, people are so thankful for your service, regardless of what you think your service meant to you. It means something to that mom and that dad that didn't get to carry their son into, the next stage of their life and hold their children. They have to put them in the ground, and it's
Right.
all of this to say is it's sombering, and I'm not trying to be sad, but at the same time, it's like, man, it really puts into perspective that we see so many families all the time. We see the same types of services. Everybody has a little bit of a unique
Hmm.
element to their thing, but it all kind of just makes so you feel like, okay, I know why I'm here, and I know that there's a reason I did have to serve in the military before I could figure out that I wanted to serve people in a different capacity that's
Right.
just as fulfilling. So,
It's two different types of service, and they both
yes,
really are a
exactly.
calling, and both are a service. And
Exactly.
I guarantee your family is extremely proud, and they want you to have that. And I
Yeah.
know that, speaking from me and millions of other people, like, they're so thankful to the people that do that to protect
Yeah.
us and protect our freedom and everything that we have
Exactly.
here. And I
Yes.
mean that from the bottom of my heart. um, I want to know, to transition a little bit off of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is going to be like a way more fun question, since you
Okay, go for it.
and it's not going to be fun at all. You pre-planned your funeral. What are the details? What's your plan?
Okay, first off, my plan is that whoever got my commission on that pre-need, you're welcome for your Christmas bonus
That's going to
because
be
I was probably the
juicy.
youngest.
Juicy.
You are probably
I
well,
would
and
I
you
would have
know,
gotten my license just for you if I would have gotten to write that. Goodness gracious.
literally, oh my gosh, and it was I took my grandmother in October of last year, and
Uh-huh.
then in December of last year, I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready to do this. Like, I want, and it's kind of I hate to say it's like controversial to say as an embalmer. I don't know that I want to be embalmed, but you know, we're just gonna let, and I would love to have a student or an apprentice embalm me, because I just want to be problematic one last time. But
I think by the
I
time
just want
by the time you're done, there's going to be some artificial
yeah,
intelligence robots embalming, and it won't be us.
sure. I want that machine to glitch so bad that
They're gonna have to,
the student has to come
yeah,
in
you're gonna
at
have to
3 o'clock in the morning.
bring in the 80-year
Yeah,
old, the only one left that
and
knows how to embalm.
I want to die on a Thursday and demand a Saturday funeral with visitation the next day. Anyway, so my pre-need is, and I do have a full traditional. I'm gonna go out to the cemetery that all of my family's at.
Nice.
Um, I would like to have a visitation. I'd like to have a funeral. I don't want to go to a church or anything. I'd like to
Hmm.
stay at the funeral home. The unfortunate thing is my pre-need is not with the funeral home I currently work for. So
Hmm.
I've kind of just said, hey, I want it transferred over here because I'd love to be in the chapel that I currently work at.
Yeah,
It just kind of makes sense. It seems like the community would be really thankful for that.
sure.
And then the biggest thing, which I did not think that it was going to be like, oh yeah, sure, we can do that. But I said, if I don't know if it's a Batesville casket or who possesses the casket or whatever, but it's like and it's not because I'm cheap. It's not, but because my funeral, my pre-need
Sure.
ended up being almost $12,000.
Woo!
Not cheap,
It'd be worth
but
30 in 70 years.
exactly. This 250 I spend every month is nothing. Anyway, uh, it's the matte black Apollo non-sealer casket. I don't
Cool.
care if people call me cheap. I don't care. Black makes you look skinny. And I just think I'd never seen a matte casket before I walked into that selection room with my grandmother.
That's
And that's
sick.
her casket that she selected too.
Oh,
So yeah,
twins.
yeah, that's me.
That's super cool. Let's I so you were a funeral director in Colorado. Now you're in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know
Yep.
the comparison between the two. Different areas of the country, so let's hear about the difference.
Yeah. So I was a funeral director in Colorado.
They all are funeral
In
directors in Colorado,
they
quote
are
unquote. And
they
I'm kidding
are.
if you're from
I
Colorado.
No, you guys are
Don't
great.
watch on
I
YouTube.
consider myself I consider myself one of you still. But I was in the heart of Colorado Springs. So right there central to Peterson Space Force Base, the Air Force Academy, Fort Carson, all of it. So,
Cool.
military funerals were prevalent all the time.
Yeah.
But so I was of like the team, I don't remember if we had 10 or 12. There was only two men. My general manager was a person from California, very,
Hmm.
very, very progressive, very like employee forward, definitely cared about, are you taking care of yourself?
Good.
What's left of you at the end of the day. And that's not to say that Texas is not as considerate, but the dynamic shift from 90% cremation in Colorado, just the
Yeah.
mobility factor, I think was really a big thing.
Gotta be
Moving
huge.
to here, it's a younger population a lot of the times that I was really being with and serving. And here it's, you have your full traditionals, you go to the
More
church, it's
traditional,
very
right?
it's very very religious, whereas there it's very humanistic, not to get terminology into it,
Yeah,
but it was a great experience. I think I got the best of both worlds when
I think
really
so.
had no experience. I wasn't even in school. I do think that there are moments that if you pluck somebody off the street in theory and say, okay, you're a funeral director now, there's a learning curve. But I had a great team there. I had great teachers and great preceptor for my embalming. So I think that, and my embalmer precepting teacher went to Houston, so we won't credit him or we won't get him for that. But the dynamic is just that people are more accepting of your green burials and your um, cremations, whereas here we're still a couple of years behind, and we're still very, very religious, but it doesn't mean that either are right or either are wrong.
No, not at all. Neither are the right
Yeah,
way, the wrong way. It's all about whatever is good for you, good for your
exactly.
family. I'm a huge
Exactly.
proponent of that. It doesn't matter one way or the other. So
Yes,
that's cool.
exactly.
That's cool that you get to be a well-rounded funeral director then, because you've had
Yeah,
different
yeah,
experiences and you've been in front of families. You've also been in the prep room, so it's a good mix of things,
yeah,
and that helps give you experience for your career and for later on. What are your
yeah,
goals as a funeral director for down the road, since you're still so young? And it seems like you've had a whole
yeah,
career and a half already. So, what are your goals?
yeah. I I don't know. Get through the week,
Come
get through my next
on.
on call schedule. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I think that I have several goals. I used to think that owning and managing would be in the future, and maybe that is one day, but I'm really happy not making such big decisions right now.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to continue my education. I think I want to pursue like either a master's in psychology or just
Ooh.
something that my biggest thought is coming from a progressive place into a kind of a more rural area.
Uh huh.
Something that I really, really like about where I used to be was that we had legal on our team. We
Really?
had a
Hmm.
employee, like, it wasn't like a therapy program, but we
Some
had
emotional
institutions built
support.
in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of see maybe integrating into more um, places like where I work at in this area, just saying, hey, I think maybe we ought to have just this outlet for myself or for my coworkers to just close the door and just get things off their chest, or even
It's helpful.
having, yeah, legal on our team. That it's one thing to say, okay, you have a will, here's what the will says and this is what we're going to do, but it's another thing to say, instead of saying, well, I don't really know anything about probate and you'll have to talk to an attorney about that, instead of that saying, well, let's go down the hall or let's go next door because we work in cahoots with this person. So I kind of see the need for
Knowledge.
more
Yeah.
education in more than just, your death studies and embalming. I think just being a little bit more well-rounded emotionally, a little bit more emotionally intelligent,
Yep.
and more like litigious, I see that being a thing. So I'd like to maybe one day be a part of the team that integrates that into this area. And then I see myself, I'd love to be a professor. I know that's really kind of silly, but I don't want to go teach in person, but I'd love to just teach. I used to love being a tutor and
Yeah.
love all that. So I think, at 26, do I have a lot of experience to teach people? No, but I do think that my education could have been better if there were people that had better experiences and that
Yeah.
shared them and that translated over the screen, because I was of the group that had to do the distance learning. So
Right.
I don't know. I see that. I don't have any other plans other than that.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you have some ideas for routes that you could
Mm-hmm.
go. I'm
Yeah.
always a huge supporter of just increasing your knowledge,
Yeah.
knowing about those things that the family deals with after the fact or during the loss. You were talking about probate,
Yeah.
things like that nature. That's a huge thing for us to learn about, and then even better if you have a
Yes.
specialist like that's involved,
Yes.
because then
Exactly.
we become more than just these are the people that bury, these are the people that cremate. It's
Yeah.
like they're doing
Yeah.
everything. They're trying to make this whole process easier for us. Same thing on the emotional side, and then this is more like the
Yes.
tangible side of things. So I think that's really cool and something that's probably going to continue. Not probably, it's very likely going to continue on going that to that trend where it's more full service as far as how we're helping
Yeah.
families.
Well, increasing just the availability of aftercare, because
Yes.
we know that people can come to the funeral home at any time and pre-plan for their imminent mother or father. But after you come and pick up your death certificates, it almost feels like sometimes funeral homes will say, okay, bye, next time someone dies, give us a call. And it's
Yeah,
like you walk out of the
that's
funeral
no
home with
good.
that urn and those death certificates, and you're like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And even just educating yourself when the time comes for our loved ones to die, and say, okay, I know that this is the next step. But now having somebody that's human that could say, I'm going to walk you through all of this, and I want really nothing in return other than to know that you can rely on somebody to walk you through this from the very beginning to the very end.
Yeah. I think it's so important to stay in touch with our families,
Yeah.
whether you're
Yes.
using a service or you have someone in house that's doing it, it doesn't matter. Super important
Yeah.
because once they go through the loss and everything's done, you spend some quality time with that person more often than not. So you need to
Yeah.
continue that relationship, and that's going to help the future business
Yeah.
because it is hard for us, and I understand it because I've been in that situation before when I first started my career as a funeral director to be like, done. That family, I'm done with it. Like,
Yes.
okay, it's over. Like, I
Yes.
can move on to the next thing. And we need to have systems in place that keeps in touch with them, that keeps engaging with them, that keeps helping them down the road,
Yeah.
because that's where people are going to see even more value. There's less value seen on physical products nowadays, and that's what our industry
Yes.
was built on. That was the foundation for a long
Yes.
time. The caskets, the vaults, now,
Yeah.
and the actual plots. Now it's all about the service. So it's like we have to
Yeah.
separate ourselves in that way. How can we be better serving families?
Well, isn't that an interesting dynamic that we're talking about how the funeral industry is hurry up and wait in the same way that the military is, and
Mm-hmm.
but yet we're saying that we need to do more of that to
Yeah.
just slow down and really be present with the family and walk them
Yeah.
through it. As much as we'd love to say, okay, at 5 o'clock I'm leaving, regardless if anything has gotten done, but
Right.
it's like,
You can't
people
do it.
see us as these subject matter experts of things that we only know what school taught us and what we're willing to teach ourselves and
To learn
invest our
about.
education in. And it's, I think really people, if they could see behind the black curtain of funeral directing, it'd be like, we're all just, running around with like, the dumpster fires in our heads, but keeping it cool on the outside. When
That's
what do I do with my hands? I don't know.
that's literally what it is.
So,
It's the
yes,
burning all around
exactly.
you chaos, but you're keeping composed in the
Yes,
center. That's a
yes,
perfect
exactly.
analogy.
Yes,
I'll give
exactly.
you. I want to give you one more last question because you touched on it right
Yeah.
before we started recording. You have a good
Hmm.
story about a removal that you had to go through. Us funeral directors,
Yeah.
we love a good morbid story. So give it to us.
Yeah. So I had just like we just gotten a call from the sheriff's department, and here in Texas, we do regularly have sweaty summers, but this summer was relatively probably the worst that it had ever been. 108-degree days, and at
Oh,
some time in August, oh, it was just terrible, and yeah, it was just terrible. And sometime in
toasty.
August, we got a call about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had been working for a firm that at 5 o'clock we left. And so it
Interesting.
was about a 30-minute drive out there. And I don't know if we got heads up or we didn't, but she was several hundred pounds, to the tune of I'd never seen somebody that large.
Oh
And
no.
she was in a mobile home, or more like an RV, a travel
Ooh,
trailer
ooh,
that,
hot.
and she was I want to say on her back,
Oh
and it
no.
was just it was very difficult, and she'd been there overnight, so there's no telling how long she had been there. And I remember going up to the place, to the travel trailer, and there was five really steep concrete steps to get
Okay.
in.
Well,
And as soon
thankfully
as
that
you
was
walked
definitely it.
in, nope, there wasn't, because as
No
soon as you
way.
walked in, you got the bathroom. So there was no way the cot could come anywhere. There was no, and it wasn't like we
What?
had a mobile cot that you could stand up, and no, there was nothing. So
What are you gonna
we ended up
do?
having to get, well, we ended up having to get six men, several of her brothers, and
Oh
several,
no.
of I think even her father, but getting her and walking her down the steps in this
Oh
sheet. All
no.
the while, I'm leaned over her, moving these items around her, and this dripping starts happening on my head.
Oh,
And I'm like,
oh.
I'm not a nauseous person. I don't have
Mm.
a uneasy stomach about certain things. I go into house fires and I think, yeah, barbecue did sound good for lunch. But I remember,
Sitting
I
at the
remember,
crematory, mmm,
yeah, yeah,
a
like
nice
man, something it smells
charred hot dog
good.
sounds good.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember turning and looking at the sheriff's deputy. And I was like, "What is leaking from the ceiling?"
Oh
And it was this
God.
old air conditioning, and there was mold all over it. And I was like,
Oh,
I am cutting all of my hair off. This is all in
I
my head. But
I thought it
so
was
she
a
wouldn't.
different sort of leak. I thought it was a
No, I don't.
different sort of
I
leak.
thought so too. And I was like, there's no way that all of these terrible omens are happening on this one remove. And then of course you have to wait for. I don't know if there's justice of the peace where you're at, but there used to be
What's
coroners
that?
where I was at. Yeah, it's like your person that determines. It's like your legal authority that determines a need for an autopsy in the absence of like in Dallas you get your coroner and your medical
Right.
examiner. Here your JP does your marriage certificates and your eviction courts and your death investigations. and
Got it.
and at the time there was a great justice of the peace that was there. And I ended up not being on the moving down the steps part. Instead, I held this big sheet so that no one could see it happening, and there was just nothing we could do about it. She did go for an autopsy, and I don't think we even did her
No.
restoration on that. I don't think we could have. Thankfully, shout out to all these trade services that do things like that because oh
Seriously.
my gosh, but yeah, yeah, and you could see the sheriff's deputy was just like sweating and he was getting nauseous, and I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't want
No.
to be here.
Yeah, let alone someone
So
else that's not in the industry. That
yeah,
sounds horrific, and the
yeah.
odor
And
must have
and I
been
I will
quite
never,
something.
and I'll never buy an RV. I maybe one day if the money is there. But I was like, this is another reason I don't want to die alone. I don't want a cat, and I don't want to be found. So yeah,
The
yeah,
three staples of a funeral director. You just heard them
yeah,
right there from
exactly.
Madison.
I I wrote a paper one time. I know we're getting done, but I wrote a paper, and it was just this like spoofy kind of thing that was like, if you want to please your funeral director, die in a convenient position and die between the hours of 8 and 5, please. So
Yeah, yeah. If you're actually laying on the cot as you go, that'd be perfect for me.
yes, if you could just lay here on my embalming table, we'll
Oh,
call the JP now.
undress yourself first,
Man,
please.
yeah,
That would be
exactly,
great.
exactly. You got a pacemaker? Take it out of
Yeah.
yourself. Got it.
The
So
dream, the dream.
yeah,
Madison, this has
yeah,
been
it would
super
be.
fun. What a great
Yeah,
conversation, and
thanks.
I mean, just we appreciate everything you've already done in your career, and I love
Thank you.
where you're headed, and it's just really fun to hear your story and just to get to talk to you. So we
Yeah.
appreciate you just taking the time and everything that you've done and everything you're going to do. You're going to help a lot of
Yeah.
people. I can tell.
Well, thanks for letting me be here, and thanks for giving me something to laugh about this afternoon. I'm the lucky one that's off today, so you got to get back to work.
Ah, that
So.
was